What's going on, everyone? It's another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. Kind of a more traditional episode here today, getting into a wide range of topics, Keenan. But the first and the obvious one is going to be the official introduction of Ross Hodge. North Texas season ended this week, and with that came Hodge's introductory press conference yesterday on Thursday. He talked for a good while, about 30, 40 minutes between a Q&A and a prepared statement, and then also heard from Ren Baker and President Gee. But overall thoughts, we'll start here with just kind of our thoughts on yesterday and then get into his contract and all of that. So let's start with just your feeling and the vibe you got from his press conferences and any kind of takeaways from what he said.
I don't know if Ren Baker went into this process trying to find, I guess, the opposite personality wise of Darren DeVries. And I'm not using that as a knock, but he did. Ross Hodge, very personal guy, very, I don't know, just very open, just talking with him, even after the press conference, he took time after the press conference to meet with media members, shake people's hands, introduce himself, really kind of set and even he answered more questions, which I'm not sure if that was planned, but it happened. And he kind of stuck around and did that stuff. And I thought that was pretty cool. Really. I mean, I did get to introduce myself to Darren when he was hired, but, we didn't ask questions after. It was just kind of like, hey, how you doing? I'm Keenan. And we went from there. But really, really powerful statement, I thought. If you weren't on the Ross Hodge train before yesterday, I think you'd be hard pressed not to be after hearing what he had to say. I think a lot of that stuff came from the heart. He really kind of talked about how hard it was for him to leave North Texas, even though this is a high major job. And, I know the concern everybody has is, is this going to be a 1-year thing again? Is it freak out? No, the contract's going to protect you there. But I think he made it quite clear that this was a family decision. This is something they talked about, they thought about. And this was the next step for him. He understood the history, the tradition. He talked about the fan base, what it means to the program and kind of revitalizing that. And just really hit, if you would make a checklist of things that a head coach has to hit to win the press conference, hell, he hit on them all. He even had some references to Pitt in there. It said his whole family had to do around 500 push-ups because he has a policy where he doesn't like cursing. So it means five push-ups. And they had to do about 500 push-ups to learn the Sweet Caroline version that West Virginia sings. So he hit on pretty much everything. I think it probably went as well as it possibly could have gone, to introduce him to people. It's one thing to list someone's accolades and, what they've done on the floor and, what they've done in previous stops, but really getting to sit down, talk to them, meet them, and hear what they have to say. I thought it was really powerful when he got choked up talking about his mother, and the work that she has gone through to kind of put him in the position that he's in now. And, the line about his father was absolutely excellent. His father had passed away, and he said, what's better than getting closer to almost heaven, and I think that kind of stuff was really powerful and real. It didn't feel at all like something that he came in, hoping to impress people. I think that's just who the guy is. And that pretty much backs up everything that we had heard, about him as a person, during his time at North Texas. I think it was reflected in the way he left North Texas. I wrote about that. Just, the relationships that he builds with people and cultivates. And even in this kind of transactional time in college basketball, he made it a point to say he still wants to make it relational. And I think that was showed, what it's not just talk. It was showed in how he handled his exit. That's a team that he had to put together, many of them first-year players, but that had a close bond, and he didn't want to leave those guys until it was over. And we'll get into some of the recruiting things and things he said about that. But off the cuff, West, I just was really impressed with the guy and thought that really Ren Baker did an excellent job of finding a guy that, we'll see how the basketball thing comes together. But in terms of representing the state and understanding what it means to people, that story about his mom, how many people had mothers in West Virginia that had done the same thing, hard work, toughness, grit, and he really defines all that.
Yeah, I thought that he was very comfortable in his own skin, first and foremost, which was it's always a refreshing sight to see when you're kind of a bigger program like WVU is that someone's not trying to force themselves to be someone that they might not be, but also when someone is as authentic and as real as Hodge seemed to be from his press conference. That's also very refreshing to see, just as an observer of someone who's going to be a leader of a large group of people, and especially young people. Just because he didn't seem to be faking any of it, he seemed to be very upfront and honest about it, and I think that's a little bit of a different vibe than what you got from DeVries there. And there seemed to be a contrast in personalities, a contrast in just kind of who they were. You could tell how much people, as you said, and family and just all of it means to him. And you really got to kind of pull back the curtain on Ross Hodge more than I think most would have expected to yesterday. And as someone who is now going to be in a place that is on their fourth coach in 4 years, that is hoping to have anything but what they just had in terms of transition, like they want him to stay. They want this to be a sticking hire. And the way that happens is you build something that people want to be a part of. And it certainly seemed yesterday that he's going to try and build something that people want to be a part of, that people want to buy into, that people seem to have an emotional investment in, as well as a financial or other type of investment in. Because he just kind of listening to him, it's a I care about you and you know I care about you. And you don't really always get that, especially in this world of college sports, as you said. And so that's a big deal for him to kind of be as upfront as he was from the start, because you don't always see that in these days of college sports. But it also kind of goes back to what we said a couple weeks ago of when this decision was made, is that Ren's getting someone he knows, and he definitely felt comfortable with this hire of Hodge, and that you can kind of see why Ren was so comfortable, because Hodge does seem like such a good dude aside from all the basketball stuff.
Yeah, and you got to remember where the West Virginia fan base is at right now. People are hurt. People are a little down. Well, they were a little down about what unfolded with DeVries. Nobody expected that to be a 1-year relationship. That hurts. And I think that at first, a lot of people were on board with this. There were some people that questioned his credentials. Only 2 years as a coach at the Division I level, but as a head coach, that is. But the guy has an impressive resume beyond that. He's a successful junior college coach. He's obviously been an assistant at multiple stops. Coached under some really, really good coaches. So it was time. I thought it was telling when Ren Baker said, he called a couple people and, that was the name out of their mouth. He called to discuss multiple coaches, and that was the name that they said. He's ready. It's his time. And I've argued this really since the hire was made, and really before that, when it was looking like it was going to be Ross, that it's always better to be 1 year early than 1 year late in things like this. And just listening to his plan, kind of his vision to build this program, I think it's easy to see why Ren Baker also believed, he was ready for this job. I think that this is going to be, a process. I don't know if you're going to wave a magic wand and things are going to be fixed overnight, but it does seem like he's entering this thing fully ready to compete. He mentioned he's going to hold himself and his staff to a high standard. They want to win right away. And, obviously winning basketball is important, and that's going to be how he's judged. No matter what else we say, all the pomp and circumstance, that is how his tenure will be judged. But I do think it matters in college athletics to have quality people. And it sure seems, from my interactions, brief, albeit brief, but my interactions, he definitely checks those boxes. And really, you go back and look at, West Virginia coaches over the years, that's been important to people. They want to have people they can relate to, that can understand that fishbowl mentality. We've talked about it a lot. You're one of the most important people in the state when you're the head basketball coach at West Virginia. And he seems fully ready to embrace that. I think we don't have to talk about it. Look at how he handled, the Pitt baseball game. Going out meeting people. He didn't have to do that. He was out there. That was by his own accord, according to Ren Baker. He wanted to go out there, him and his family, meet people, shake their hands, get them excited and get them charged up. And you just look at the responses on our message board. You look at the responses on social media. as I said again, home run. I think that West Virginia hit a home run. And kind of segueing here, I know that the next questions everybody are going to have, the hire is good and done, but the way that we think about everything, it's kind of like in recruiting. You get a commitment, it's fun for about 10 minutes, but then it's what's next. That's the same process with coaching hires. And everybody's going to be wondering about his staff. Everybody's going to, I asked about his staff yesterday, if there was a timeline, and he essentially said that, he's not putting a timeline on it. He confirmed he's going to bring some guys with him from North Texas, but we'll get into the contract. He's got the funding to also go out and get some other coaches to kind of mix and match this staff and put together the best ability to compete. He was asked about transfers, and I think it's interesting too. And this is a thing that I think a lot of people do forget in these situations. Yes, he was still coaching North Texas, but he's not spending 24 hours a day game planning for North Texas. I think a big chunk of that, and it's been evident, if you've been on our message board, if you've logged into social media at all, there's been a lot of contact with transfer portal players. That's not by accident. Yeah, they're definitely already preparing. They're already targeting. College basketball is in a dead period right now before everybody freaks out. And I knew this coming into it. Hodge addressed it yesterday. It's a week-long dead period. So there's no visits. Coaches can't be on the road. Right now, what you are doing, essentially, is contacting guys, trying to set up visits, trying to get things locked in. And I think you're going to see that kind of go full bore once this dead period ends after the 10th. And then you're going to start to see visits. Then you're going to start to see guys on campus. Then you're going to start to see the roster put together. But I thought this was very interesting, and he said this multiple times after the press conference with some media members. He's not going to rush this for the sake of rushing it. And I know everyone out there is kind of getting flashbacks to what happened with Darren DeVries last year because he said something similar, but it's about building a team, not necessarily collecting a group of players. So he wants to get the right fits. That might not be on, my timeline or your timeline, but the only timeline that matters is truthfully his and how he puts this together. So I think he's going to take the same approach with staffing and recruiting, and that's not a bad thing. If you get it right, it's not a bad thing. So I'll be interested to see how many, if any, of those North Texas guys come with him. Obviously, some guys on the staff. I think he's had a lot of the same staff members since he's been here. I wouldn't be surprised if three or more of those guys come with him. But players, there's a few out there that are pretty good players. They know his system. They know his scheme. And really through all this, you lost a couple days of visits, but it's hard to get visits in that early period anyways. Usually most of those guys, as we talked about before, most of these guys that are making decisions, they pretty much knew where they were going. They just needed kind of affirmation. What was the school thrown around for Isaac McNeely pretty much as soon as he entered the portal? Louisville. Where did he end up? Louisville. Surprising, huh? It's crazy how that thing works. But I think that's important. Now, I know people are going to start to panic, and if this goes for a week and a half, we get into next weekend, there's no commitments, people are going to be freaking out. Don't. I'm pleading you not to do that. As you learned last year, Darren DeVries put together a pretty good roster. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. And had Tucker not got hurt, they're definitely playing in the NCAA tournament. So it can be done. It will be done here. And it's a process of kind of letting it play out. As much as that hurts, I understand that. As much as that hurts in today's we got to have it now kind of society, practice a little bit of patience here.
Yeah, patience is important. I think that also we said this all throughout. I mean, the last year under DeVries he's going to now have to build a new foundation. And so he wants to get dudes that match the culture part, that match the on-court part, that match the off-court part, that match the class. Like there's so many different dynamics within all of this. Add in the fact that NIL's a thing, and then
the house settlement.
House settlement. And then also add in the fact that there's so many kids in the portal. It's not like there's a lack of options in the portal. And so, you might strike out on kids earlier than later, but it's not like the portal is going to get dried up. It's a well that has tons of oil that you can go get. Go ahead.
My perfect kind of antidote here to this is look when West Virginia added Amani Hansberry and Sincere Harris last year. A lot of people were really questioning those moves. They haven't done anything in Illinois, and I would try to say, well, they were stuck in log jams or they're developing. Players get better over time. Now look a year later, those same people are freaking out because those guys are in the transfer portal. Now
Mm-hmm.
they might end up staying. Who knows? But my point is, there's a lot of, like, to reinforce your point, there's a lot of guys out there, and there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. It's about finding the right guys, and you don't have to. Now, I understand everybody wants to land one of those top 15 transfer guys, but you don't have to do it that way to win. And that's been proven over time and time again. And I think it'll be interesting to see the type of players, the type of way that Hodge builds this. Obviously guards are easier to recruit than bigs, but you need bigs. How many 3-guard, 4-guard lineup does he play? We'll get into some of that in the basketball here in a minute, but there's a lot of questions that need answered.
I also think on the transfer portal part, think of it this way. He's had to build 2 rosters through the transfer portal the last couple of years, and I can guarantee you that North Texas is not at the top of most guys' list, and so he's
Wait,
had.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I think I am, unfortunately. But yeah, like North Texas is not going to be one of those teams that you go to on April 4th. It's going to be one of those teams that you go to when it's April or May, right? And so I think that he understands the patience part because he's had to have the patience the last couple of years. And look, he's taken 2 teams to the NIT in the last couple of years while having to overhaul his entire roster each time. And he said yesterday he was preparing to probably overhaul his entire roster, or at least most of it, yet again. And so it's not like he's a foreigner to the portal. And so I think people who might have some hesitation because West Virginia has not made any moves in the portal yet in terms of acquisitions, you like just understand that it's not like he's an NBA guy coming here to the college level who has not experienced, like he's experienced both ends of this. And so that I think is also something to keep in mind as everyone goes through this process.
And the junior college angle. I mean, I think that used to kind of be a stigma in college basketball, high major college basketball, the junior college coach, but that type of skill set to rebuild, restructure your roster every 1-2 years is more essential now than it's ever been. And he won at a high level at the junior college, at 2 different junior colleges. So I think that speaks to his ability to reconstruct, kind of realign, and move forward. And I think that's going to help him here. And obviously, one big advantage that he's going to have at West Virginia over what he had at North Texas is he almost had to build his roster out of necessity every year. North Texas can't afford to keep guys. Here, you potentially can. So it'll be interesting to see the mix. Is he going to try to take this maybe like DeVries did, take some transfers and some younger guys, mix it together? Or is he going to take a team full of older guys in his first year and redo it every year? There's a lot of different ways to do it. And I'll be interested really to kind of see the first couple. Will it be some rotational guys he's familiar with? Will it be a big splash guy? There's a lot of different ways that this thing can unfold. I did want to touch a little bit. We've talked about his defense. He talked about the importance of that and, how that's been a staple for him. But I had some questions about his offense. I think Kevin Kender might have asked about it during the press conference, but, I asked about it afterwards. We've talked about being deliberate but efficient, and that's kind of how he described it. And I asked him about pace because I was curious really if it was more dictated by personnel or if that was how he chose to play. And he kind of answered my question, which I had believed, it was more personnel driven. They kind of build their roster with the intent of winning games in March, winning games in April. And you're not going to be able, with the roster that they have, to run up and down the floor and beat an Auburn or a Kansas or anybody like that. It's not in your best interest. But the thing about his offense is a lot of people think, it is deliberate. You can argue slow at times, but he wants his players to take open shots if they're there. They just don't want to take those forced shots early in the shot clock or bad shots that are going to lead to runouts and then getting into something that they don't want to do. Because, if you're missing shots, you can't set your defense. So I think it's pretty simplistic. The model there, I guess, if you want to try to prorate it out a little bit, is what Grant McCaslin's done. He's not going incredibly faster at Texas Tech, but he is going faster. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that all comes together once he does have the personnel and pieces in place.
Yeah, I think to your point, the Houston comparison was something that he made a lot yesterday, and rightfully so. I mean, I think, as he said, any team in the country that wants to get to the Final Four should probably compare themselves to Houston because they're pretty good at this whole winning thing, if you haven't noticed. But Houston, even offensively, they've started to kind of shoot the ball a lot better than more traditional Kelvin Sampson teams have. And it's easier to do that when you have the money to go get some of these higher end players who are better offensively, but also still skilled defensively. Like LJ Cryer at Houston, right? Like, like there's dudes on these teams that are still playing that are good defensively and offensively, but you don't get that overnight. And you certainly can't just get that at North Texas more times than not. And so just it goes back to like that whole development and the foundational thing. Like it's all a process. And while it might not be the high scoring offense that you want to see early, it certainly sounds like it will have the ability to transition into that and transition into a more faster paced offense. And when you can go, but don't force the go if it's not there to take. And I think that's kind of where Hodge is at, but also you just don't know until you get the personnel into place of what exactly you will be.
And I think when you look at him as a talent evaluator, because that's going to be the next question, we've talked about some of the challenges he faced at North Texas with roster retention. Look at where some of his guys ended up. They spent a year at North Texas, and then they're playing at, Vanderbilt and now Providence, St. John's, Michigan. These are good schools. So he's obviously identifying good players, developing them. I thought it was really telling, yesterday when Ren Baker said he spoke to Dusty May, the head coach in Michigan, and he was at Florida Atlantic before, and Brendan Laureate, played there, and he didn't name him by name, but, doing detective work, it's pretty easy to connect the dots. May talked about how he couldn't get anything out of him compared to what Hodge did. And, he was the sixth man of the year in the AAC this year. So that speaks to his talent evaluation and development, and I think that's encouraging, for West Virginia moving forward. But we do have the contract now. I know that's been kind of the discussion of everybody. I was able to Freedom of Information request that, and it's pretty similar on the surface to Darren DeVries. There's some differences. It's a $15 million contract over 5 years. I think it tops out at $3,200,000 in the final year. There's an automatic extension clause, very similar to what DeVries had in his, but there is one difference. If Hodge finishes in the top 6 of the Big 12 in either the first year or the second year, he gets another year on. It's $100,000 more on the contract. But it also, this one includes a trip to the NCAA tournament. It's also kind of automatically hit. With staffing, we mentioned that it's $1.75 million to kind of build his staff. That's, assistant coaches, support staff. Doesn't include the strength coach and trainer. And I thought it was interesting to me that Baker can increase that. It's up to $1.75 million, but he can increase that. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. And then the last mega thing that we should discuss is everyone's going to ask about the buyout. And it's a little bit different than things we've seen before. If Hodge leaves before April 30, 2026, he would owe 75% of the remaining compensation from that $15 million. That total drops to 56.25%, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And if between I think it's April 30th, 2027 is when that
May
would
1,
happen.
26 to April 30, 27.
Yes, and the final one is 37.5% after May 1st, 2027. But it's interesting to me that this is kind of Baker attaching himself to Hodge and vice versa, in a sense that if Baker would leave before, any of this, it would be 37.5% across the board. So this is kind of a commitment from both of them. And I think that's interesting, kind of speaks to their relationship and kind of where they're at. West Virginia is required to pay 100% if they would elect to move on from Hodge, before April 30th, 2027. And that drops to 75% after May 1st, 2027. So same things as DeVries. There's obviously they got to spend some money to get him, away from North Texas, relocation stipend, temporary housing, all that. But that would actually need to be repaid if, like DeVries, if that somehow would occur, he would leave, before the first year of his contract is up. So nothing really surprising there. I thought initially it would be a similar contract, and it was. I think it's fair for both parties. I think there's a commitment here, and obviously West Virginia is ensuring, in a sense, that we're not going to have a repeat of that. I don't think anybody would pay that buyout. Everybody would want to pay that buyout. So,
yeah, that's a very tall buyout.
You thought
For
DeVries was tall. I mean, that would
yeah,
be
and and think of it this way: like West Virginia is probably going to net a couple $1 million in this
Yep.
once you kind of go through all of everything going each way between Indiana, North Texas, and WVU. Of West Virginia is going to come out with some cash here in a world where everyone's trying to find out how to generate revenue, how to find revenue from different spots. Well, I mean, I guess get your coach hired by Indiana and you get some revenue. Go ahead.
I
Before,
think it's clear that helped West Virginia.
yeah,
The way this is structured. I think they've given Hodge a very competitive salary to start. I think that they've given him a lot of resources to work with his staff. And that's what Baker said he wanted to do with that $6.15 million. You obviously got to pay some of that back to North Texas, and there's some other costs involved, but I think they do end up ahead. It's not going to be a ton of money, but they end up ahead out of this thing, and we'll see how it turns out. They might have ended up, everyone was freaking out, and I'm not saying this is going to be the same thing, but it's just how life works when, Dan Dockage left West Virginia overnight, like a thief in the night, and then they hired John Beeline. That turned out pretty well. So we'll see how it plays out. But financially, West Virginia, like you said, does come out ahead here.
any finance expert will say being positively in the net of money is a good thing, and that's where West Virginia is. Let's transition to football, shall we? Spring showcase is
Who's ready?
Who's ready for the most? I mean, the scrimmage that's not a scrimmage, but a scrimmage of all time, I guess, is a good way to put it.
The way it was described to me is it's going to be an abbreviated scrimmage, which, I mean, abbreviated so far is quite literal. Abbreviated scrimmage, some competitions, and some fun stuff. So individual stuff maybe. So we'll see. I'll guarantee this: there will be more access. I will see more in this than I've seen throughout spring, and I understand it. I mean, I do. I'm kind of tongue in cheek there, but with the transfer portal and the way things work with the window, I get it. I mean, I completely understand it, but at the same time, I'm actually a lot more excited than I would typically be for a spring event, just because, I will get to see some of these things. I will get to kind of get an idea, and those in attendance will as well. So it is exciting. I mean, I do think that I kind of, sometimes you're feigning excitement a little bit for some of these things, but the most exciting thing might be the media meal, getting some hamburgers and some fried chicken. But this one is interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is you're going to get to see a lot of new dudes who you just haven't seen before. And while we could nitpick all day about certain things that will 100% change before August 30th of this year, it's hard to not really kind of just be like, okay, cool. It's a new year with a whole lot of new players and a whole lot of new coaches. And a lot of those coaches have West Virginia ties or have ties for fans being former players. And so it's going to be just a good thing to see. It's also going to be a lot better to see than the last time there was football played from West Virginia, and they couldn't score in the first quarter against Memphis. And the time before that was the Texas Tech game. And so chills,
I thought
right?
we had wiped ourselves clean of that one.
Yeah, we're having a
You're out there scaring people on the podcast
in the middle of the day. Yeah, happy Halloween. But yeah, it's that's what this whole thing's about. It's not really about the on-field production or what this means going to September. It's about here's what we've got, here's what we've done, here's all the new guys. And for Rich Rodriguez, this is probably a pretty big deal for him. This is his first time back, I guess, as an official head coach capacity in a football way. That's not just a press conference. That's not just a meeting with the media, right? Like this is a real football thing in front of fans for the first time since everything happened way back when. And so that's a big deal within itself. And that might be the biggest deal of the day, truthfully, for what is set to happen on Saturday.
Speak for yourself about the spring game breakouts. I'm still waiting for the Dante Thomas Williams season from the 2014 spring game, I believe it was. But no, seriously, we've all seen it over the past. There's guys that have amazing spring performances, and it doesn't lead to a lot. There's guys that have amazing spring performances, and it does, but it's important not to read too much into it. But the cool thing is you're going to be able to see it and get an idea of, how things are going. I imagine, Rich said they're not going to break them up into teams or anything. So I'll be interested to see how it's structured and kind of how all that goes together. Hopefully I find some of that out in the press box before the game Saturday, and I'll share that on our message board if I do. But, it's football. It's football in the spring, and I like football all year round. So anytime we have football, it's certainly exciting. And with football, we have some recruiting news. West Virginia is back on the trail with commitments, that is. Jet Walker, a running back from Texas. He's a name that if you followed our website, you're familiar with. West Virginia offered him in January. Found out the other day, actually, speaking with his head coach, that the current coaching staff had been recruiting him back at Jacksonville State. I did not know that. So they had already had a connection there, kind of developed it. Chad Scott started things. He was the guy that offered him in late January. Larry Porter has taken over. You watch the guy's tape, and he is impressive. His numbers kind of speak for themselves. He averaged 10 yards a carry, 34 touchdowns. They get 2,400 rushing yards last year.
Yeah, 23, 48, and 38 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, just insane numbers. And you look at his tape, I don't think he's ever caught from behind. And you cannot arm tackle the guy, runs right through him. Looks like he's going to be a perfect fit for Rich's scheme. Little wasted motion, gets vertical quickly and then runs through people. And the speed, he's kind of a longer strider, so it doesn't look like he's moving fast, as fast as maybe some, but trust me, he's moving fast. And West Virginia needed more speed.
He's a bigger body too. It's not like he's
Yeah.
a Jaheim White type size. Like he's 6'2", 212 currently.
You don't arm tackle the guy.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. He had other scholarship offers from Houston, Oklahoma State, Ohio, Charlotte, UNLV.
And I think he's the guy that would have ended up with a lot more. He probably will end up with a lot more, as things go. I'm surprised, watching his tape and where he plays at in Texas, that there wasn't as much interest early. But, sometimes that happens. Guys slip through the cracks. But credit to West Virginia for being all over that one. And not only Walker, West Virginia's going to have some official visits this weekend. Legend Bay, a name that anybody that's been following the quarterback position is very familiar with. He's kind of become, I don't want to say the favorite, but definitely a Blue Lot fan hero. Really electric athlete at the quarterback position. He's a guy that, not the biggest guy, but I think he had 41 touchdowns, over 3,000 all-purpose yards last year. He was player of the year, in his division. And he's a guy that is just electric. I don't like to – everyone that's ever followed me knows I don't like comparisons, so I'm not going to do it. But you watch his tape, he'll remind you of some guys that have played in this offense before. Just dynamic, electric, and really kind of what West Virginia wants at that quarterback position, because they want to play with 11. Ashton Blatt is a linebacker from the Pittsburgh area. He's expected to be here as well. There's been some moving and shaking with the list. A couple guys that were going to be here, Travis Johnson and Brody McWhorter, doesn't look like they will be, although I never say never in these deals. Kids have unlimited official visits now, guys. It's not like it used to be. You don't have to pick 5. You can take 25 if you want, I guess, but I don't understand why some kids do that. But still, that's beside the point. So there'll be official visits. There'll be other visitors on campus, and I'll try to work to see if I can get, a complete list. Still doing that. But overall, recruiting is moving. The Walker commits, the first for West Virginia since February, but that's pretty typical. I've done these articles before and shown people this. Recruitment kind of happens early for West Virginia, then a few in the spring, and then things always pick up in the summer. So expect those, and we have a running list right now of all the people that are expected to be on campus for those June official visits. The list is growing quite long. There's going to be a couple in April, and I think, obviously some earlier in June, outside the big weekends so far, but it's going to be a long list. And then you throw in the portal on top of it, Wes. We're going to have more portal players, portal this, portal that, portal with a baseball bat. It's going to be everywhere.
Portal with the baseball.
Yeah, we're going to have portal everywhere. I just get ready for it, seriously. And all jokes aside, I think that expect more roster movement. West Virginia's going to have it. You're going to have guys entering. Some of that's going to be by design. Hopefully, West Virginia avoids any pitfalls of losing guys they want to keep. But we all know, Wes, that's a tall task in today's college athletics. But keeping things under wraps, like Rodriguez has done, helps those things. And I think that's why you're seeing coaches across the country take the exact same approach. It isn't by accident. It's definitely intentional. So we'll see what unfolds. That's going to have a week this week after the spring game. They're going to meet with their players for a week and then start that process of kind of trimming things down, realizing the positions they want. I think it's clear looking at their offers right now that are going out already. They're going to add at least one or two more wide receivers. They're going to add maybe some defensive linemen and probably offensive linemen. I could name every position probably right now.
I mean, Rich has been saying, I feel like every press conference this spring,
He's definitely
we need depth at this position. Next one, we need depth at this position.
He is having fun with it. It's clear. I love when he's just so candid with us. I mean, kind of jumping off the track here, but I love when he's so candid with us where he's like, I'm not going to tell you that. I mean, at least he's honest. I appreciate that.
The lack of coach speak and the lack of just normal speak.
His press conferences have been a hoot, by the way. Like, I've very much enjoyed them. Had a good time with them.
And he's always storytelling too.
Yes.
It's like there's always stories involved. It's never just a straight up question and answer.
I'm hoping to get more into the meat and potatoes, in August, when things, there's no roster movement, that kind of thing, more specific personnel questions. But when it comes to just stories and things about how he wants to manage and run his program, it's been very, very entertaining.
Speaking of transfer portal baseball bat, Mountaineer baseball has won 4 straight. They are 4-3 in Big 12 play, 24-4 overall. They're in a kind of a weird spot with their schedule in terms of they are in a kind of their Big 12 part of the schedule that isn't that strong. And so it's hard to lose series at this point and not have that negatively affect you. So they've got 3 against Utah this weekend. They might have to sweep that because they are all quad 4 games by the RPI metric, which that's another story for another day.
That's above my pay grade. I stick to basketball.
Yeah, and then they beat Pitt this week, beat Ohio State. They scored about 100 runs this past weekend at BYU.
That was nuts, by the way.
Yeah.
I just kept looking at the score and I was like, oh my, what is going on?
Well, the one that was nuts, they were up 7. So they were up 7-0 on Saturday. Then they go down 15-7. Then they go up 19-15, and then they win 19-16. Who would have thought? The pitching is struggling a little bit. You can kind of see it that there's a lot of new guys to their rotation, but they are hitting the crap out of the ball, which, I mean, it's hard to lose when you're scoring 8+ runs a game, which they've been doing recently. They scored 11 against Pitt, 9 against Ohio State, 19 and 20 in their 2 wins at BYU. So we'll see what happens this weekend. Weather-wise, it's going to be tough on Saturday for your spring game, for your baseball game. Like, it's just going to be a mess in Morgantown.
I hope it's not. I'm hoping it passes.
Oh, I'm not sure you're going to get what you're hoping for.
I don't think so, but I'm hoping it's not.
But, yeah, that's where they're at. But we're going to get out of here. We will keep it locked on our website, obviously. Spring showcase content tomorrow.
We'll have some reactions from that too. I'll be in the stands, obviously watching and kind of let you guys know what I see, because I know it's not, at least to my knowledge, it's not televised.
Yeah, not televised.
I will try my best to let you know what I'm able to observe.
You should get a microphone and play by you should be Tony Caridi for the day.
Most people say I should just live stream everything, but if I'm live streaming everything, I'm not going to be able to write or do anything else in my job. So in case you've ever asked that question,
the live stream and not enough attention to everything else.
Yes, in case you've ever wondered why I've never done that, it's hard to do the job if you're not actually watching the game. So
yeah, good. That's good journalism right there. But that'll do it for this episode of the West Virginia Sports.com podcast. Be sure to head over to our website for everything that we are talking about right now. And I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings, and thank you for listening.